On the marble steps of Beaumont Tower, Henry Beaumont sneered at the woman checking guest badges. His lip curled with practiced disdain as dozens of Manhattan's elite brushed past her without a second glance. She wore the standard black uniform of building security, her name tag reading simply Larissa Connolly. When she politely asked him to scan his identification card per the new gala protocols, Henry stepped closer, close enough for his expensive cologne to overwhelm the air between them. His voice carried across the crowded lobby with deliberate clarity. "You are just a security guard. People like you do not belong upstairs." The gathered crowd laughed, some nervously, others with genuine amusement at the spectacle. But when a crisis erupted minutes later, and corporate lawyers demanded the immediate presence of a mysterious majority shareholder, every camera in that glittering room turned toward the guard Henry had just humiliated. Larissa's posture transformed. Her shoulders squared, her chin lifted, and her voice became pure steel. She removed the cheap uniform jacket, revealing elegant fabric beneath and a pendant bearing a familiar crest. "Stand aside." "Henry," she said calmly, "it is time everyone learns who truly owns this empire." Beaumont Tower rose 63 stories above Manhattan, its glass facade reflecting the city's ambition back at itself. The building had stood for 32 years, a monument to one man's vision and 3 decades of corporate expansion. The lobby alone could swallow a cathedral. With Italian marble floors polished to mirror brightness and living walls of carefully maintained greenery reaching toward a ceiling that seemed to touch the clouds. Security cameras watched from every corner, their red lights blinking in steady rhythm. The building housed 2 distinct worlds that rarely acknowledged each other's existence. The world above consisted of executive suites with panoramic views, conference rooms with tables that cost more than most people's annual salaries, and a sky lounge where champagne flowed at events celebrating quarterly profits. The world below existed in fluorescent-lit corridors and cramped break rooms, populated by security guards, maintenance workers, and cleaning staff who arrived before dawn and left long after sunset. These 2 worlds shared the same address but occupied different universes entirely. Larissa Connolly had worked security at Beaumont Tower for 3 years. She was 32 years old. With observant eyes that missed nothing and a quiet competence that her supervisors appreciated but rarely acknowledged publicly. Her colleagues knew her as reliable, always willing to cover a shift when someone's child fell sick or when a family emergency arose. She spoke little about herself but listened carefully to others. What few people noticed were the small details that did not quite fit the profile of an ordinary security guard. She occasionally answered visitors' questions in fluent French or Spanish, surprising the reception staff who assumed she had never traveled beyond the city limits. Sometimes she would stand at the base of the elevator bank, gazing up at the Beaumont Group logo with an expression that seemed to contain entire histories. Her personnel file listed a modest apartment address and unremarkable references. Nothing in that file explained why she had chosen this particular building, this particular company, this particular position from which she could observe everything while appearing to be nothing at all. Henry Beaumont had never known a world where doors did not open automatically at his approach. The only son of the Beaumont dynasty, he had been raised in boarding schools and summer estates, surrounded by people whose job was to anticipate his needs before he recognized them himself. He was 35 years old and handsome in the way that expensive grooming and good genetics could manufacture. His suits were tailored in Milan, his watches collected from Geneva, and his confidence manufactured from a lifetime of never being told no. Henry was not cruel by nature, merely oblivious. He had never learned to see the people who made his comfortable life possible because no one had ever required him to look. Security guards were uniforms, not individuals. Cleaning staff were invisible hands that maintained order. The concept that any of these people might possess inner lives as complex as his own had simply never occurred to him. This blindness was not malice. It was the natural consequence of privilege so complete that it became indistinguishable from the air he breathed. Adelaide Beaumont had managed the company since her husband's death 5 years earlier. At 61, she carried herself with the rigid posture of someone who had learned to show no weakness in rooms full of men waiting for her to fail. She had loved her husband deeply, but she had also understood his flaws. He had been brilliant at building empires and terrible at managing the human complications those empires created. Adelaide knew secrets about the family that she had spent decades protecting, burying them so deep that she sometimes forgot they existed at all. Her relationship with Henry was complicated by her constant comparison of him to his father. The son had inherited the confidence without the vision, the entitlement without the drive that might have justified it. She worried about the company's future in his hands, but could not bring herself to consider alternatives. Blood was blood, and Beaumont Group would pass to a Beaumont, regardless of whether that Beaumont deserved it. Archie Flynn ran the security department with military precision, a legacy of his 20 years in the Army. He was 54 years old, with gray threading through his close-cropped hair and the kind of steady presence that made people feel safe without quite knowing why. He had seen Larissa's potential from her first week on the job, recognizing in her the same watchfulness that marked good soldiers and better leaders. Something about her did not add up, but Archie had learned long ago that everyone carried secrets, as long as those secrets did not compromise building security. He was content to let them remain buried. He treated all his staff with equal respect, a policy that occasionally put him at odds with executives who expected security personnel to be both invisible and immediately available. Archie did not care about executive expectations. He cared about doing the job right and treating his people like human beings. It was a simple philosophy that had become revolutionary in a building where hierarchy determined humanity. The annual Vision Gala transformed the Sky Lounge into a showcase of corporate excess. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across 500 guests in designer gowns and custom tuxedos. A jazz quartet played standards that no one really listened to while waiters circulated with champagne and canapés that cost more per bite than most workers earned per hour. The event celebrated Beaumont Group's latest quarterly triumph and previewed the company's ambitious expansion plans. Larissa had been assigned to the VIP checkpoint, a position that guaranteed maximum exposure to the building's most important guests and their varying attitudes toward service staff. She checked credentials with quiet efficiency, offering each guest the same polite greeting regardless of how they treated her in return. Most ignored her entirely, which was expected. Some offered brief nods of acknowledgement, which was appreciated. And then there was Henry Beaumont, who arrived with an entourage of similarly privileged friends, all of them radiating the particular confidence that came from never having to prove anything to anyone. The confrontation began simply enough. Larissa extended her hand toward Henry's invitation and credentials, following the security protocols that had been established specifically for this high-profile event. Henry's expression shifted from boredom to irritation to outright contempt in the space of 3 seconds. He knew who he was. Everyone knew who he was. The idea that a security guard would dare to delay his entrance, even momentarily, struck him as an absurdity worthy of public correction. His friends watched with the eager anticipation of people about to witness someone else's humiliation. Henry leaned close enough that Larissa could smell the whiskey on his breath, the expensive cologne failing to mask the evidence of pre-party drinks. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he asked, though it was not really a question. Larissa's response was measured and professional. She explained the new security requirements, her tone neither apologetic nor confrontational. This neutrality seemed to enrage Henry further. He wanted submission, not competence. He wanted fear, not professionalism. The words came out loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. designed for maximum public impact. You are just a security guard. People like you do not belong upstairs. The phrase hung in the air like a verdict, and the surrounding crowd responded accordingly. Nervous laughter rippled through the VIP queue. A few guests exchanged knowing glances that suggested this was simply how things worked, how things had always worked, how things would continue to work. Larissa processed the humiliation with a face that revealed nothing. She scanned Henry's credentials, returned them with steady hands, and wished him a pleasant evening. Inside, something old and painful stirred, a memory of being dismissed, overlooked, and denied what was rightfully hers. But she had not spent 3 years in this building to react impulsively. She had not endured countless small humiliations to throw away her position over one spectacular public insult. Her plan required patience, and patience required control. Henry swaggered past without another glance, already laughing with his friends about the guard who had dared to inconvenience him. He would remember this moment differently later. They all would. Adelaide Beaumont took the stage 45 minutes into the gala, her speech a practiced blend of gratitude and ambition. Behind her, massive screens displayed the company's achievements in glossy graphics and impressive numbers. She spoke of legacy and innovation, of honoring the past while building the future. The audience applauded at appropriate intervals, their attention divided between her words and their phones and their quiet calculations about what this all meant for their investments. Then the screens flickered. The carefully prepared presentation vanished, replaced by documents that were never meant to see public light. Internal emails appeared, their contents discussing financial irregularities and questionable partnerships. Contracts with suspicious clauses scrolled past. Numbers that did not match public filings flashed in accusatory red. The jazz quartet stopped playing. The champagne glasses froze halfway to lips. 500 phones simultaneously lit up with notifications as news of the apparent hack spread across financial networks. In the space of 90 seconds, Beaumont Group's carefully constructed image began to crack. Chaos erupted with the particular frenzy of wealthy people watching their money evaporate in real time. Guests demanded explanations that no one could provide. Phones rang with calls from panicked investors. The company's stock price began its freefall before Adelaide had even finished processing what was happening on the screens behind her. Henry pushed through the crowd, shouting orders at anyone wearing a uniform. His earlier arrogance transformed into desperate aggression. He pointed at the security staff, the IT technicians, the catering workers, anyone who might serve as a convenient target for blame. "Someone let this happen," he screamed. "Someone is responsible for this disaster." His finger landed on Larissa, who had moved to help manage the crowd flow toward emergency exits. "This is your fault. You people were supposed to protect this building." The accusation was absurd, but absurdity had never stopped powerful people from finding scapegoats among the powerless. While executives panicked and blamed, Larissa acted. She coordinated with Archie Flynn to secure the server rooms and lock down sensitive areas. She directed confused guests toward safe exits while maintaining communication with the building's emergency systems. Her movements were precise and purposeful, suggesting training that went far beyond standard security protocols. Archie watched her work with growing certainty that his suspicions had been correct all along. This woman was not simply a security guard who happened to be competent. She was something else entirely, someone playing a longer game that he could not yet understand. When the immediate crisis stabilized, Adelaide Beaumont called an emergency board meeting. The company's lawyers arrived with grim faces and grimmer news. According to corporate bylaws, any crisis threatening shareholder value required notification of all major stakeholders, including one whose identity had been kept confidential for decades. A majority shareholder whose existence most board members had forgotten or never known. The lawyers prepared to make a call that would change everything. The story of Larissa Connolly began 32 years earlier, in a small apartment far from Manhattan's gleaming towers. Her mother had been young and alone, working multiple jobs to support a child whose father could never publicly acknowledge her existence. That father was William Beaumont, founder of the empire that now bore his name. Their relationship had been brief and secret, conducted in the shadows of his legitimate family life. When Larissa's mother became pregnant, William had faced a choice between scandal and silence. He chose silence, but not abandonment. He established a trust, created legal documents, and made provisions that would protect his daughter even if he could never claim her openly. He visited when he could, always in secret, always briefly. He told Larissa stories about the company he was building, the legacy he hoped to leave, the future he imagined for her, even if that future had to remain hidden. Then he died, and the secrets he had kept became weapons in the hands of those who inherited his empire. Larissa was 20 years old when her mother finally revealed the truth. A wooden box hidden in the back of a closet contained everything. Letters in her father's handwriting, legal documents establishing her identity and her inheritance, a will that granted her majority ownership of the company that bore his name. The revelation shattered and rebuilt her understanding of her own life. She was not simply the daughter of a struggling single mother. She was the heir to a fortune, the secret child of a titan, the rightful owner of an empire that did not know she existed. But knowledge and power were different things entirely. When she approached Beaumont Group's lawyers with her documents, she was met with polite dismissal that barely concealed hostile rejection. Adelaide Beaumont's legal team found ways to delay, to question, to bury her claims in procedural complications. They offered settlements designed to make her go away quietly. They made clear that her presence threatened everything the legitimate family had built. Larissa could have fought publicly, could have dragged the Beaumont name through courts and tabloids. Instead, she chose a different path. She spent the next decade preparing. She studied corporate law and forensic accounting. She learned security protocols and crisis management. She trained herself to observe without being observed, to gather information without raising suspicion, to wait for the right moment with the patience of someone who had already waited her entire life. When she finally applied for a security position at Beaumont Tower, she did so with credentials that were genuine but incomplete, references that were real but carefully curated. She became invisible in the way that service workers were always invisible to people like the Beaumonts, and from her position of invisibility, she watched everything. She learned the rhythms of the building, the habits of its executives, the secrets hidden in plain sight. She documented irregularities and noted suspicious patterns. She identified Clinton Reeves, the ambitious CFO whose after-hours activities suggested loyalties that extended beyond the company he supposedly served. She built a case file that grew thicker with each passing month, waiting for the crisis that would give her the leverage to finally claim what was rightfully hers. The data breach provided exactly the opportunity Larissa had anticipated in the aftermath of the gala disaster. She approached Archie Flynn with evidence that the hack had been an inside job. Security logs showed Clinton Reeves's assistant accessing server rooms at unusual hours. Financial records revealed connections between the CFO and an offshore investment fund that had positioned itself to profit from Beaumont Group's sudden decline. The attack was not random corporate espionage. It was a calculated move in a hostile takeover attempt, orchestrated from within the company itself. Archie listened to her presentation with the focused attention of a military strategist assessing battlefield intelligence. When she finished, he asked the question she had been waiting 3 years to answer. How does a security guard know how to conduct this kind of investigation? Larissa met his eyes and told him the truth. She was not just a security guard. She had never been just a security guard. And the time had come for everyone to understand exactly who she was. Henry Beaumont spent the days following the gala watching his reputation disintegrate across every media platform. Headlines called him the clueless heir, the privileged son who shouted at workers while his company burned. Social media dissected his every public appearance, finding evidence of arrogance in gestures he had never thought twice about making. His mother summoned him to her office and showed him the coverage with the cold disappointment of someone whose worst fears had been confirmed. "You want people to remember you as the heir who blamed security guards while someone stole your inheritance?" she asked. "Is that the legacy you are building?" For the first time in his life, Henry had no confident response, no easy deflection, no escape into privilege. The mirror his mother held up reflected someone he did not recognize and did not like. Meanwhile, Clinton Reeves moved forward with his plans, presenting Henry with documents that promised to stabilize the company's collapsing stock price. All Henry had to do was sign papers he did not fully understand, transferring authorities he did not realize he was surrendering. He was desperate enough to consider it, desperate enough to reach for any solution that might restore his damaged image. The intervention came moments before Henry's signature would have sealed the company's fate. Larissa appeared in the hallway outside the conference room, still wearing her security uniform, and asked Henry to wait before signing anything. His reaction was predictable. A flash of recognition followed by contemptuous dismissal. The security guard from the gala was now offering business advice. The absurdity would have been amusing if the stakes had not been so high. He ordered Archie Flynn to remove her from the executive floor immediately, threatening termination for both of them if they did not comply. But Larissa stood her ground. She told Henry that the documents in his hands would transfer controlling interest to parties who did not have the company's best interests at heart. She told him that Clinton Reeves had orchestrated the data breach that was destroying their stock price. She told him that she could prove everything she was saying if he would give her 5 minutes in front of the board. Henry's instinct was to laugh and walk away, but something in her certainty made him hesitate, made him remember how she had handled the crisis while he had flailed and blamed. He did not trust her, but he was no longer certain he could trust anyone. The emergency board meeting convened in the largest conference room on the executive floor. Adelaide Beaumont sat at the head of the table, flanked by lawyers and accountants and faces lined with worry. Clinton Reeves occupied his usual seat, his expression betraying nothing of his internal calculations. Bridget Moore, the company's general counsel, had spent the previous night reviewing documents she should have examined years earlier, discovering provisions in the original corporate charter that most board members had never seen. When Archie Flynn knocked and entered with Larissa still in her security uniform, several board members objected immediately. This was a closed meeting. Employees below executive level had no right to be present. Then Bridget Moore stood and announced what her research had uncovered. According to the company's founding documents, a majority shareholder existed whose identity had been protected by confidentiality provisions for over 3 decades. That shareholder had rights that superseded normal corporate hierarchy, including the right to participate in any meeting addressing existential threats to the company. The majority shareholder was present in this room. The majority shareholder was Larissa Connolly. Larissa removed her security jacket and placed it carefully over an empty chair. Beneath it, she wore clothing that would not have looked out of place in any boardroom, as if she had been preparing for this moment even as she dressed for her shift that morning. Around her neck hung a pendant bearing the Beaumont family crest, a gift from her father given during one of his secret visits decades ago. She addressed the room with a voice that carried the authority of someone who had earned her position through preparation rather than inheritance. She explained who she was. The daughter William Beaumont could never publicly acknowledge, the heir whose existence threatened the comfortable assumptions of everyone in this room. She presented her documentation, the letters, the legal instruments, the will that her father's own lawyers had drafted. She showed them the evidence of Clinton Reeves's betrayal, the security logs and financial records and communications that proved his involvement in the data breach. She laid out her case with the precision of someone who had spent a decade building it, who had sacrificed 3 years of her life to this moment of revelation. Henry Beaumont experienced the revelation as a series of collapsing certainties. The security guard he had publicly humiliated was his half-sister. The woman he had dismissed as beneath his notice owned more of the company than he did. Every assumption he had made about her, about himself, about the natural order of his privileged world, proved to be catastrophically wrong. He remembered his words from the gala, playing them back with the particular cruelty of hindsight. "You are just a security guard. People like you do not belong upstairs." The phrase that had seemed so casually powerful now revealed itself as the declaration of a fool who could not recognize the throne hidden beneath a uniform. He wanted to defend himself, to explain that he had not known, that he could not have known. But the excuse crumbled before he could voice it. He had not known because he had never thought to look, never imagined that the people he dismissed might possess worth beyond their visible function. His ignorance was not innocent. It was the product of a lifetime of choosing not to see. Clinton Reeves attempted damage control with the desperation of a man watching his carefully constructed plans collapse. He questioned the authenticity of Larissa's documents, suggested she was a fraud exploiting a crisis for personal gain, demanded that security remove her from the building she apparently owned. But the evidence she had gathered was comprehensive and verified, the work of someone who understood that accusations without proof were merely noise. Bridget Moore confirmed the legal validity of every document. The board's own forensic accountants traced the connections between Clinton's activities and the hostile acquisition attempt, one by one. The CFO's allies on the board withdrew their support, recalculating their positions in light of new realities. When building security finally escorted someone from the executive floor that evening, it was Clinton Reeves, not Larissa Connolly. He left through the same lobby where she had been humiliated days earlier, past the same checkpoint where Henry had declared that people like her did not belong upstairs. The irony was lost on no one. Adelaide Beaumont requested a private conversation after the board meeting adjourned. The two women faced each other across a desk that had once belonged to the man they had both loved in different ways. Adelaide spoke first, acknowledging what she had done decades earlier. The legal maneuvering designed to protect her family's position at the expense of a child who had done nothing wrong. She did not ask for forgiveness. She simply stated the facts of her choices and their consequences, taking responsibility without excuses. Larissa listened without interruption. When Adelaide finished, Larissa told her that she had not spent 3 years as a security guard to destroy the company her father built. She had come to protect it, to ensure that his legacy served more than the interests of those who happened to share his name. She proposed a partnership rather than a war, a restructuring that would honor both branches of the family while creating accountability mechanisms that would prevent future abuses. Adelaide studied the younger woman with an expression that mixed respect with something approaching relief. "Perhaps," she said quietly, "this is what he would have wanted all along." The conversation between Larissa and Henry took place on the executive floor's outdoor terrace. Manhattan sprawling beneath them in a grid of lights and possibilities. Henry had requested the meeting himself, approaching her with the uncertain body language of someone who had never before needed to apologize for anything. He stumbled through explanations that sounded hollow even to his own ears. Excuses about not knowing who she was, justifications about the pressure he had been under. Larissa let him talk until he ran out of words. Then she told him that his apology, while appreciated, missed the point entirely. The problem was not that he had insulted his secret half-sister. The problem was that he had believed it acceptable to humiliate any human being based on their job title. She had not been wrong because she was secretly important. He had been wrong because she was a person, and people deserved basic dignity regardless of their position in any hierarchy. The distinction seemed to genuinely confuse him at first. So foreign was the concept to everything he had been raised to believe. But she saw something shift in his expression, a crack in the foundation of assumptions he had built his identity upon. 6 months later, Beaumont Tower had transformed in ways both visible and invisible. A new plaque in the lobby honored essential workers by name, including security guards, maintenance staff, and cleaning crews who kept the building functioning. Corporate policies now required executives to spend time working alongside employees at every level, understanding the jobs they had previously ignored. Henry Beaumont participated in these rotations voluntarily, learning to see the people he had once looked through. He discovered that the security guard who checked his credentials each morning had served in the military and was putting a daughter through college. He learned that the woman who cleaned his office at night was studying for a nursing degree and dreamed of opening a clinic in her home country. These were not revelations that changed his fundamental character overnight, but they were cracks in the armor of his obliviousness, openings through which empathy might eventually grow. He stopped at checkpoints now, scanning his badge without complaint, greeting guards by name. The change was small, but small changes were where transformation began. Larissa assumed her position on the board with the same quiet competence she had demonstrated as a security guard. She pushed for transparency initiatives and worker welfare programs, honoring her father's legacy while building something better than he had managed to create alone. Sometimes she still walked through the lobby in the early morning hours, remembering what it had felt like to be invisible in this building, to be dismissed and overlooked and deemed unworthy of basic respect. Those memories kept her grounded in ways that privilege never could. She established a foundation in her father's name, funding education and opportunity for workers who reminded her of her mother, people who worked multiple jobs and dreamed of better futures for their children. The foundation's first scholarship went to the daughter of a security guard, a young woman who wanted to study corporate law. The cycle was beginning to turn. Archie Flynn remained head of security, now reporting to executives who understood that his department protected more than property. He and Larissa maintained their friendship, built on mutual respect and shared values that transcended organizational charts. He had known she was more than she appeared. He had simply waited for her to reveal herself in her own time. The press conference announcing the company's restructuring drew international attention. Adelaide Beaumont stood at the podium with Larissa at her side, presenting a united front that surprised observers who had expected conflict between the legitimate widow and the secret daughter. They spoke of accountability and transformation, of honoring the founder's vision while acknowledging past failures. When reporters asked Larissa how it felt to go from security guard to majority shareholder, she paused before answering. "The question assumes those are different categories of human worth," she said finally. "I was never less valuable when I wore that uniform. I was never more valuable when I removed it. What changed was not my worth, but your perception of it. And if this experience teaches anyone anything, I hope it is that every person in every role deserves to be seen as fully human." The room fell silent as her words settled into the consciousness of everyone present. She had not become someone new. She had simply stopped hiding who she had always been, in a world obsessed with titles and appearances. One phrase had revealed the rot beneath the glitter. "You are just a security guard." The words had been meant to diminish, to dismiss, to remind someone of their place in a hierarchy that valued position over personhood. Instead, they had exposed the speaker's blindness and set in motion a transformation that no one could have predicted. The security guard had been a daughter, an heir, and an owner. But more importantly, she had been a human being deserving of dignity, just like every other person in that building, regardless of their role or rank. The story of Larissa Connolly spread beyond business pages into conversations about worth and value, and the assumptions people make about each other based on uniforms and job titles. It became a parable for an age that desperately needed reminding that the people who serve are not servants, that the people who protect are not possessions, that every person wearing every uniform carries within them stories and dreams and inherent worth that no title can bestow or remove. Beaumont Tower still rose 63 stories above Manhattan, its glass facade still reflecting the city back at itself. But something had changed in those halls, something more fundamental than ownership structures or board compositions. The people who walked through that lobby now looked at each other differently, saw each other more clearly, recognized in each face the possibility of hidden depths and unexpected dignities. And in that recognition lay the beginning of something that might, with time and attention and effort, become something like justice. Larissa still visited the security office sometimes, sitting with Archie Flynn in front of the camera monitors, watching the building's daily rhythms unfold across dozens of screens. She could have claimed any office in the tower, could have surrounded herself with the trappings of the power she had inherited. Instead, she chose to remember where she had started, to maintain connection with the perspective that had allowed her to see what others had missed. From the security office, everyone was visible. Executives and interns, visitors and vendors, the powerful and the overlooked. All passed through the same cameras, all moved through the same spaces, all equally human beneath the roles they performed. "This is the view that matters," she told Archie once. "Not the view from the top, looking down, but the view from here, looking at everyone equally." He nodded, understanding what she meant without needing explanation. Some lessons could only be learned from positions that the world considered low. Some truths were visible only to those the world had taught itself not to see. The woman who had once been just a security guard had learned those lessons and discovered those truths. Now she was teaching them to an empire. One day and one changed perspective at a time.